We are told by the grammar experts, the highly educated scholars, that there's this structure called the gerund participle perfect. And it would look like this. Here's an example: having worked, having said, having relaxed. When you look at this, you might think that you see a present participle plus a past participle, like having, present participle, worked, past participle. Or you might think you see a gerund plus a past participle, a gerund, past participle. Okay, that's what you might think. So let's take a detailed look at this and see what we really have, see what we find. Here's our study sentence. Having sanded the entire wall, you may now apply the primer. Okay, now with the next sentence, we have having sanded the entire wall, which kind of looks like an adverbial phrase. All right, hold that thought. And then you have, you may now apply the primer. Well, that's a genuine clause, and you'd probably call it an independent clause. But I call it genuine because in my system, this is how it works. And I'll explain that a little bit later. Now, within the adverbial phrase, you have this little structure, this little phrase, having sanded. Now, this is called the gerund participle perfect. But is it really? Because that would imply that you have a gerund plus a participle plus some sense or feeling or flavor of the perfect tense. Okay? That's what they're implying here with this. So having, all right, is it really a gerund? Is it a noun? We don't know. Sanded, is it really a participle, which would function as an adjective or noun complement? Well, we really don't know. And the perfect tense, all right, when we read this, where is the perfect tense? How do we get that feeling? All right. Having sanded the entire wall, you may now apply the primer. So this is our base, our study sentence. As used in this sentence, is having really a gerund? That is having a verbal. So here's having as a gerund. Here's an example. In most religions, doing is held in higher esteem than having. Having is a gerund here, functioning as a noun. See, having actually is a gerund. And doing also is a gerund, right? Now, when you're saying this, what you're really saying is, in most religions, doing good deeds. You see, this is elliptical. They're just getting right to the point. Or when they say having, they're kind of really saying having possessions or having wealth or whatever. So here you have your gerund, having, and you have an object of that gerund, possessions, right? Or in the contemporary, really modern sense, you might say having is your noun and possessions is your noun complement, right? So having is a gerund here in this situation, but what about sanded? From our study sentence, all right? What about sanded? Is it an object? And here having in our study, if it's a noun, is sanded a noun complement? Well, when you look at this and you think it through, you see that having does not categorically appear to be a gerund verbal. All right? Now, is having a participle? Is it a verbal? So here's having as a participle, and here's an example. A having mentality is deemed inferior to a giving mentality. Now, in this sentence, having is a participle here, right? And is functioning as an adjective or noun complement. It's an adjective modifying mentality, or you could say it's a noun complement complementing mentality, right? So here's your participle. Here's your noun mentality. Here's your adjective or noun complement. And here's your noun again. But when we go back to our study sentence and our phrase that we're studying, you see having is really a participle. And sanded, is that a noun? Well, sanded cannot have a having quality. You see, if that's a modifier or a complement, sanded can't have a having quality. That's silly. So we see then that having does not appear to be a participle verbal. Now, can having be a normal ordinary verb? Here's the definition of have, the verb: possess, own, hold, experience, undergo. Now let's conjugate the verb have, and we'll use the second person singular because that's the person used in our study sentence. So you have the conjugation, you have your tenses. These are your traditional tenses. In my grammar system, they're named differently, but this is traditional: basic, perfect, progressive, and perfect progressive. Some people call this simple. We see that the normal verb have will need an object. I have many tools. Here's your object. We also see that having is present only in the progressive and the perfect progressive tense. But you can't really say you were having sanded, and you kind of can't say you have been having sanded. All right? As used in this study, having cannot sensibly be considered as a normal verb. All right, that's pretty clear. Now, we ask, can having be used as an auxiliary verb with the verb sand? So let's conjugate the verb sand. And again, we'll use the second person singular. And you see the tenses here. There is no having auxiliary in the above conjugation. The auxiliary verbs, there's no having, all right? There is no having sanded or having anything, right? Now, the study phrase in question was and is having sanded, all right? In the above conjugation, we have two figures that are grammatically close to our study phrase, okay, close to it, and that would be you sanded, okay, that's your past basic tense, and you have sanded, that's your present perfect tense, right? You have sanded is close to our study phrase, but not close enough. We still haven't answered the big question. What exactly is having doing here? What's it doing here? What specific function is having performing? We see that having in this study seems to be an anomaly, an oddity. We can't seem to categorize or pigeonhole the word. It's not this, it's not that. So what do? As I noted, the grammar experts will tell you that the phrase having sanded is referred to as a gerund participle perfect. However, I have yet to find anyone, anywhere, who explains concisely why they refer to it as such. I believe this is so because they don't, in their minds, have a system that will categorically provide a sensible solution. Using my own system, I call it scale phrase grammar for lack of a better term, I believe that I can get closer to a solution than anyone has at this point, and I believe I can do that not solely by employing guesswork or conjecture. I can do it by using concepts that you are already familiar with if you've seen my previous videos. So if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know what I'm talking about. I kind of have my own system, my own perspective, and it helps me see things that other people have missed for over 100 years. To solve the gerund participle perfect problem, I'll use two of my own concepts. One is levels of structure. With sentences, I have levels: genuine, synthetic, elliptical. And then I have the abstract proform, which I kind of invented. Now, abstract is defined as something that summarizes or concentrates the essentials of a larger thing or several things, okay? And proform, in my situation, my system, means a word or lexical unit that is dependent for its meaning on reference to some other part of the context, sentence, or thought in which it occurs. A proform stands in for reasonable implied content. This is very important. A proform stands in for reasonable implied content. In other words, it takes the place of reasonable implied content. Now, my premise here for this video, the whole point is I'm telling you that having is an abstract proform. I'm claiming this, and I'm going to prove it. The proform having is employed to transition a genuine clause or an adverbial clause to an elliptical form. That elliptical form can sometimes include a condition phrase, as we'll see, and I'll show you that in a later video. Now let's look at it, see if I can prove it. So here's having as an abstract proform with two genuine clauses. Here's your genuine clause. You will have sanded the entire wall, period. You may now apply the primer, period. So there's your other genuine clause. And here we have the future perfect tense. That's important. Keep that in mind. Now, on a synthetic level, we have you will have sanded the entire wall, but it's synthetic because we are omitting three words and we are omitting a period. That's hard to say. Okay? So since we have done omission, this is now synthetic. This piece here is synthetic. It must be joined to something. So here again on the synthetic level, we are inserting our abstract proform because this is what happens in the mind. The mind does this faster than the speed of light. All right? Having is inserted and a comma is inserted and we make our y a lowercase. So now we have these synthetic elements here that must be joined together. And then we end up with the elliptical level. Having sanded the entire wall, comma, you may now apply the primer. Now that's a complete sentence in itself, all right? But it's on the elliptical level because many omissions have been made. And that's how my system works. And it works almost every time, so I'm pretty happy with it. Now, what are our results? Do we have a gerund participle perfect, as the experts tell us? Well, what do we see? We see the verbs in both genuine clauses or in the active voice. Now, keep that in mind for later. We're going to talk about other stuff, but keep in mind that both of the verbs are in the active voice. You was the subject in both genuine clauses, and that's important to keep in mind. So we see that having is not a gerund verbal. It's not a gerund. Having is not a participle verbal. Having is not a normal verb. Having is not an auxiliary verb. All right, but there was, okay? We'll give them that. There's the perfect, right? There was a perfect flavor in the first of the two original genuine clauses, and we got it from there. There's a hint. There's a deep seed in there, okay? Now, let's look at having as an abstract proform with the adverbial clause. After you have sanded the entire wall, comma, you may apply the primer. Well, we're already here as we start out on a synthetic level because after you have sanded the entire wall, all right, is synthetic. It's only partial. It has to be connected to something. So they connect it to the genuine clause, all right? Now, we omit these three words after you have, all right? Now, we're still in a synthetic level, and we insert the abstract proform, the word having, all right? So it's still synthetic because this must be joined to this. Now, finally, on the elliptical and final level, as we speak, this is what we say. Having sanded the entire wall, comma, you may apply the primer, period. So here is your study phrase right there. That's what we're working on. And we want to know, is it one of these? Is it a gerund participle perfect? Well, what are our results? We see that the verbs in both original clauses up here are also in the active voice. In other words, they're performing the action. The subject is performing the action. The subject is not being acted upon, all right? So keep that in mind for later. You is the subject in both original clauses. Okay, that's important for later, for my next video. But we see having is not a gerund verbal. Having is not a participle verbal. Having is not a normal verb. And having is not an auxiliary verb. But there was, again, a perfect flavor in the original adverbial clause. See, that's the present perfect tense, so there was a little bit of flavor in there. There was kind of a hint of this word here, perfect, all right? So we'll give him that. Now, we see from the above that having is an abstract proform. It must be, for there is no other way to explain how it came to be used in such a fashion. You cannot explain its meaning or its use without my concepts, levels of structure, and abstract proform. I have not been able to find anyone on the internet who has solved this puzzle. I believe this is the first time it's been solved. In my next video, I'll explain how the abstract proform having plays an integral role in the formation of the condition phrase. That's one of my grammar innovations. Now, I know I took too long, but I thank you for being incredibly patient, because this is my most difficult grammar study that I've ever done. This is very difficult. It started over 30 years ago, and I think I'm onto something. So I'll see you in the next video, and we'll take the discussion a little bit further. Thank you.